secrets to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Folks, good morning. You are listening to the Valley Labor Report, and we are in double overtime. It is Sunday morning, and we are continuing our Project Profile series. Last month, I interviewed Adam, talked about his life, jobs, dreams, and struggles, and today the turn's tabled. He's going to be talking to me. He's going to be interviewing me today, so
that's right.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Last month, you talked to me a little bit about my backstory, how I came to the labor movement. This month, it's your turn. I think folks, who listen to our program deserve to know, who they're listening to. So, with that out of the way, let's just start from the beginning. Jacob, you were born and raised in North Alabama, right?
I was born in the Huntsville Hospital, September 11th, 1996. And I have never lived more than 35-40 minutes from the city center. Although I've always lived very far from the city center. Grew up first in Owens Crossroads and then in Newmarket. So I've been always on the outskirts growing up, and then as I got older and I moved out, I lived downtown for a little while, then in Madison for a little while, and now I'm off university. So,
yeah. One thing that's interesting is that Huntsville is a community full of transplants. So, you having never left really this region is a little bit unique, I would say. And you mentioned you have been out in the country, more or less, out in the county. Even though you've been close to Huntsville. So tell us about your family and just growing up around here.
Yeah, my family is probably pretty unique, I think, even among people who live here, because I grew up what's called, North Alabama folks are going to be familiar with this term, and people outside of North Alabama are not going to be, but I grew up holiness. So that's like a Pentecostal type group of, a group of Christians. And our life always revolved around church. We actually moved from Owens Crossroads to Newmarket to be closer to the church that my parents wanted to go to. And they moved farther away from work than they'd ever been before. When they were in Owens Crossroads, their commute was like 20 minutes, and then when we moved to Newmarket, it was 40 minutes.
Wow.
But they wanted to be closer to church, and so most of my friends growing up were from the church. Most of my extracurricular type activities were with people from church. So, religion and faith was definitely really central to like everything growing up for me.
Yeah, I would say to say that you had a conservative religious upbringing is probably an understatement, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And, just as an illustration of the conservative religious nature of it, my whole family is conservative. I'm the only one that I'm aware of that currently votes for Democrats sometimes when I vote. And I'm sure that, especially before pre-2010, this is another thing that will interest people outside of Alabama. Pre-2010, both houses of the Alabama legislature were held by Democrats. But the Democrats that held the legislature in 2009 are, in more ways than one, the same as the Republicans who hold it now, or very similar at least. And in some cases, it is actually literally the same people. The Senate Majority Leader, the Democratic Senate Majority Leader pre-2010, Tom Butler, is now back in the Senate as a Republican. So,
right. And he's not unique. He's not unique.
He's not unique at all. Our governor first ran as a Democrat, Kay Ivey, right? So I'm sure that before that, my some folks in my family would have voted for Democrats down ballot if they voted at all. And that's another interesting thing. A lot of people, or some people in my family, don't vote because they don't want to get selected for jury duty. And
why is that?
Because they don't feel like they're supposed to judge people in an official sense. So they feel like they have kind of a loose prohibition. I say a loose prohibition because if they were, I don't think it's not something that they would go to jail for, but it's like, if the state was like really like, okay, we really need you on a jury, they would do it. I think it's not very strongly held, but it's strongly held enough that they don't want to vote or a lot of them didn't, and some of them still don't, but some of them have actually started voting recently. But the illustration that I was going to make is when I was kind of becoming more left wing, in 2015, 2016, I could get some of the members of my family on board with the more economically left-wing programs. I could get them to say like, okay, yeah, maybe Medicare for all would make sense. Maybe free college tuition would make sense. This maybe it would make sense, but probably even to have a higher minimum wage. But the thing that really that is really way more important to them is the social stuff. And so very anti-gay marriage, very anti-abortion, and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of their orienting. That's the way that they see the world, is much more through social cultural stuff than economics.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask you to kind of expand on this part of it, that it's not just like conservative politically, but conservative really in the whole sense of the word, right?
Yes.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, because, for me personally, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church off and on, but, as conservative as its reputation, I have been surprised at some of the stories you've told me. I feel like anytime we get to talking about, your backstory, or like you growing up, or life with your family, especially when it comes to your church, I always am surprised, and it's just unfamiliar for me, even as someone who grew up
Right.
in what most folks would consider a pretty conservative Protestant tradition. So
Yeah, well, they don't. The most obvious things for people that are kind of looking on at these folks is the women don't wear pants, the women don't cut their hair, they don't wear makeup, they don't wear piercings, and the men don't wear shorts. They have to wear at least short sleeve shirts. They have to have short hair, which is, something that I have strayed from. They have to be clean shaven. They can't have facial hair. And no ball games, no movie theaters, and all of these things kind of, they do exist on a continuum.
sure.
Like the no piercing stuff. There are a couple churches that my parents would go to that are within this loose affiliation that are actually like, they're so anti-jewelry, they don't even wear wedding bands. They don't wear wedding bands at this church, which is a fascinating kind of thing. And then there's, on the other end, my church, funny enough, is one of the more liberal. The church that I grew up at is one of the more liberal holiness churches, and so there's like one or two people. There's a couple of families there that will go to ball games. There's a couple of families there that will go to movie theaters, and they're not like excommunicated or talked to about it, So
Risky.
Yeah, very. It's so liberal, in fact, that some holiness churches do not go to the church that I grew up at because they think that they've crossed the line, right, by being too much in the world.
Ooh.
So, and it's, some people, and so the no ball games, no movie theaters, that comes from a like be separate from the world kind of thing. And so that also exists on a spectrum. Like I said, there's some people that will even go to ball games. That's really kind of on the liberal end. And then there are some people that they don't go to amusement parks. My granddaddy is a preacher, actually a holiness preacher. He preaches against going to Disney World, right? And this was before it was the normal conservative thing. Like my granddaddy's been preaching against Disney World for 20 years. So
Right.
Some people don't even go to like Dollywood, or my grandparents don't go to Dollywood. Some people don't go to the Smokies. So it's definitely, as far as the kind of rules and restrictions, a lot of people would consider it on a continuum of like kind of the Amish or the Mennonite kind of stuff,
Right.
Because they have so many of these restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I thought about those traditions. I even thought about, some very conservative Muslims that I've encountered throughout my life, and some similarities there.
I went to high school with some Muslims who there's another thing that some holiness people do is they have to have chaperones on dates. And so there will like literally be 20-something-year-old people that can't go on dates unless their little sister or little brother comes along with them. They can't be alone with their significant other before they get married, which is bonkers. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is culturally pretty common, maybe in some other areas, but not something you would expect among Gen Z folks in the United States.
Yeah, but it's happening today.
It is happening today. And I have found myself always surprised by some of the stories that you have about this, faith tradition and the fact that it's still going very strong.
It is, yeah. I mean, the church that I grew up at is growing. I mean, it's never been there have never been more people that go to the church that my parents go to now. Even as I think I imagined that COVID hurt them some, but every time I go back there, there's a whole lot of people there. There's always a lot of people there. And just in 2015, they built a brand new church that cost like $500,000. And it was so low that, because it's a pretty big church that they built. The price was low because there are some families there that own construction companies and they volunteered a lot of the labor. But anyway, they paid it off within a year. And so that'll tell you kind of how committed they are to the thing and how much there is and how many folks there are. But this is something that I talked to when we had Kyle and Damon on. I spoke about this a little bit, and I wanted to highlight it here while we're kind of talking about the way that I grew up as far as kind of my faith tradition. I would not say it's all bad. I mean,
you still will visit the church,
right? Yeah, no, and I still have great relationships with the people from the church.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring up is the fact that you are still able to visit the church, and obviously, as you mentioned, you've strayed a bit. Would be one way of putting it. You can pick up there, but I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, well, it's there are some really cool things that being part of that tight of a knit community can do, and that much commitment to one another. I mean, there is really a lot of love in that congregation for each other that I think is really cool. And one of the stories that I remember, and I think maybe I told this when we were talking to Damon and Kyle, but there were 2 rounds of tornadoes, and I can't remember if this was in 2011 or whenever it was, but there were 2 rounds of tornadoes. And this one woman who went to the church was in a trailer, and it blew the roof off of her trailer. And it was, and so she could, and then, so the first one came by, blew the roof off of her trailer. There's all sorts of stuff all sorts of stuff in her yard and everything, and she doesn't know what she's gonna do. She's got all of her stuff like in the yard and everything, and then there's another tornado coming an hour behind it. And she's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And so they put out on the one call system on the church that's like an announcement system that sends every member of the church like a text or a thing. And it's like, like at your own risk, basically, Sister So-and-so needs help moving stuff before this next tornado comes. Is anybody able to just get a truck and take some stuff inside your house to hold it for her? And within an hour of a tornado coming, there was like 70 people at this woman's trailer. I mean, it was amazing. I was one of the people there, so I saw it. And it was just so cool having all these people and, that she trusted all these people to hold on to her stuff for them, because that was the plan. Is like, I'm just going to hold on to this until the tornadoes pass, and we're just going to figure out how to get it back to you. There wasn't even a plan to get it back to her. We're just going to figure it out after, but we're going to, and then we're going to get her to a safe place. And that's what they did. And in like 30 minutes, that's a pretty amazing thing. And then at my church in particular, I think there's a real small d democratic tradition that I always really liked, and that that small d democratic tradition is not in all holiness churches. And so sometimes when I would go to another holiness church that didn't have this, I would feel kind of alienated because they were a lot more strict about the way that they did their services. But what I mean by that is the service, anybody could take hold of the service if you were part of the church, right? I was never part of the church. I never, quote unquote, got saved or whatever. So it would be weird if I tried to take control of the service. But I mean, anybody, you could just get up at any point and you could testify. You could, men could, any man, if they wanted to, could ask somebody to read a passage from the Bible. Sometimes, they could even read a passage from the Bible if they felt led to. They could start singing a song. And even in the middle of a sermon, if somebody feels led to go lay hands on somebody in the middle of a sermon, they can do that. And that's just, and a lot of times there's not even a sermon. Most of the time, the service is just testimonies and singing and praying. And so testimonies is like, people getting up and telling how they felt the Lord move in their life. Or
right.
Something that they feel like the Lord did for them, or something that they're just generally thankful for.
And they feel compelled to share.
Yeah. And so that's, a really, like I said, a small d democratic way to run a church service that you're not going to see in a lot of places. Even in other holiness churches, it would be very frowned upon for like a young woman, let's say, in the middle of a sermon, the preacher is kind of like the highest on the hierarchy, to interrupt him and walk across the altar in front of God and everybody and lay hands on somebody. That would be like frowned upon, and you could even potentially see somebody like getting rebuked publicly in a situation like that. But that's welcomed and encouraged at the church that I grew up at, which is and I've seen it. I've seen even a visiting minister. So this is, somebody you're even more supposed to be kind of deferential to, is a visiting minister. I saw one time this visiting minister, he was up preaching, and this young girl, like 14 years old, just walks across the altar and lays hands on somebody in the middle of a sermon. And, so that was, I was like, that's a pretty cool thing that I grew up around, I think.
Yeah, and I can tell how it's, stuck with you. And in talking with you about your upbringing, what I sense is like I think what I sense with my own background with faith, and I think what most people listening probably can relate to, is like a bundle of contradictions, right? Mm-hmm. There's pieces of it that are very exclusionary, pieces of it that are alienated, and then there's pieces of it that, like you said, small d democracy. There are pieces of mutual aid and solidarity, as you mentioned with the tornadoes. I mean, that's mutual aid and solidarity in action right there. Yeah. A community really taking care of one another, and there's a lot to respect there. It's easy to fixate on how that community is formed and who's excluded from that community.
Right.
And we should. But, I think it's more complicated than it's often made out to be.
Yeah, and I don't want to paint too rosy of a picture, because I do know that there are certainly people who have felt, spiritually abused in the holiness movement, like they were really kind of wasted a lot of their life in it, and that all of these rules and restrictions really. And then not only having those rules and restrictions, but being socially pressured to abide by them,
right?
And the social consequences that come with not abiding by them really, have an effect on folks. And some of the theology is really, really, really strict. They reckon that once you get saved, you can't sin, and they do have a very narrow view of sin, which I think is strange now. They basically look in I think it's Galatians, the 17 works of the flesh or whatever, and they say as long as you don't do these, you're not sinning, and so they don't think that speeding is a sin. They don't think that thinking something bad about somebody is a sin necessarily. There are lots of things that other people would consider sin, because other people consider sin as just generally not being good. And there's reason to think that, because there's a verse in James that says, anytime that you know something to be good and you don't do it, that's a sin. And so I don't know how holiness people get around that verse, and I've asked some of them and they don't have an answer. So they have a very narrow view of sin, but they say you can't do these things. And if you do these things, then you lose your salvation and you don't get another chance at it, which is very, so
I found that interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're growing up in this your whole life and being told. And so, it's easy to convince people, if they've spent 30, 40 years, 10, 20, 30, 40 years in a thing, that this is correct. And so you grow up in here in this environment, and you get saved, and then you sin. Well, now you're doomed for eternity, and there's literally nothing you can do. You have no other chances, and that's it. And that is a pretty scary thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that I struggle to even process, frankly.
Yeah.
So given that upbringing, I imagine that very few people would have predicted you would become interested in labor unions and progressive politics, right? I imagine your parents and fellow church members,
yes,
would not have called this 10 years ago, right? They wouldn't have predicted this. So, what led to that path?
Yeah, I think for me, there was certainly I always considered myself kind of analytical, and I also wanted, because I was not part of the church and because I didn't feel this prohibition to not be on jury duty, I wanted to vote in 2016 when I was 18. I turned 18 a little before 2016, and I wanted to vote. And in 2014, which is when I'm making these kind of mental preparations to I'm going to vote in 2016, I would have considered myself a conservative, very much, and even some of my friends that I still have from high school. And my fiance, who I knew from high school, actually, we were friends in high school, and she kind of had a crush on me a little bit, and I kind of had some feelings for her in high school, but she didn't want to pursue me, and there wasn't enough that we didn't see each other enough that I was trying to pursue her at that time. And but she didn't want to pursue me because I was like always arguing with people about church and about religion and about how abortion is bad and how gay marriage is bad and you shouldn't do it. And that's a bit of an exaggeration. I wasn't always doing that. I wasn't just a total freak, but that is something that I would discuss with people in high school. You know, my junior or senior year of high school. That's something that I was doing. But I knew for sure at that time that I didn't know anything really about economics. And that's a pretty important part of your vote, right? That's a pretty important part of your vote, right? And
Well,
so,
and I gotta say, at least you knew what you didn't know. You thought you knew a lot about culture and society from from your background and upbringing, but you know, I gotta say, not everyone even makes that step to say, I don't know about economics, right?
yes. Yeah, and somebody asked in the chat what high school I went to. I went to Buckhorn High School, graduated class of 2015. So I, so 2014, 2015, I'm thinking I'm going to be voting, and I'm very much culturally conservative, very, definitely would consider myself that, but I also am aware that I don't know anything about economics, and I say, probably I'll end up voting on culture and social issues, but I need to at least understand the downsides of, or the upsides. Maybe Republicans are right on economics, maybe they're not. I don't know. It was never stressed. They never really, that was just never a topic of conversation. How good trickle-down economics was in my house, right? And so I knew what I didn't know, and so I start trying to read. I start just trying to do more research about stuff, about like what are economic issues, like what do both sides say. And I was trying to do this, in the 2016 primary debates, even as I was trying to do this, I was pretty confident I was going to vote for a Republican. And so at first, I don't even think that I was planning on watching the Democratic debates. I figured I'd do my own research on what they were saying. But when I watched the Republican debates, I was really, really so turned off by it that I figured I would just watch the Democratic debates. And I was turned off by the childishness. I was turned off by imagine that, like an 18-year-old being turned off by the childishness of the Republican debates. But that's what happened.
Right.
Like penis jokes, and it is just so unsubstantive. And I was like, I don't know, I'll probably end up voting for one of these freaks, but let's see what the Democrats are saying. And now, social issues for me definitely didn't click like this for a few years after, but something really, really clicked when I heard Bernie start talking about his economic program and how we have people in this country who don't have health care, and we have the money to pay for it, and so we should do that. We have people in this country who could go to college, they have the capacity to go to college, and they don't, and we have the money to pay for it, so we should do that. We have people who did go to college, they had the mental capacity to do it, and now they're saddled with debt, and it doesn't have to be that way, so we should make it not that way, right? And so, skeptically at first, but there was definitely a light bulb that went off there, a switch that changed for me economically. And then, I did try to, best I could, I tried to figure out, like, to what extent is he saying true? And I really became convinced that yes, in fact, actually, there are people that don't have health care and we can't pay for it. And yes, in fact, we can pay for college. And yes, in fact, we can raise the minimum wage and all of these things. We can do them and they'll be good. And I was just really totally convinced. And then also at the same time, after high school, I started working at a restaurant. And so let's see. I would have started working at the restaurant in June of 2015. And so, so the election wouldn't have been, so I would have been working at this restaurant for another, for about a year and a half before the 2016 election. And all of this is happening, some of this is happening as I'm working in this restaurant, and Bernie's explaining these things, and then I'm seeing it in the restaurant too. So we've got, for me, I had both there's this cerebral understanding of like, okay, there are, so many millions of people, but also I saw it. There were people that I was working with that were working 40, 50 hours a week and didn't have health care, that had food stamps, that had trouble taking care of their kids when they had to work. There were people that were addicted to drugs. There were violent felons that I was working with. And talking to them and spending so much time with them, and if you've ever worked in a restaurant, you've had those late night conversations on top of a 5-gallon bucket, right, while you're smoking a cigarette or maybe something else, and you just really get to know these people. And I became convinced that I could just as easily be in this situation. Something that secular people will say is like, I have privilege. And so this really turns off religious people. But to me, they'll say the same thing, but they just say blessings.
Right.
And they have this, it's not a Bible verse, but there's a common saying, there but for the grace of God go I. And if those are, to me, just different words for the same phenomenon, which is to say that, yes, of course, there is autonomy, and we have control over our lives to a certain extent, and there are choices that we can make. But there's a lot of stuff that's not within our grasp, right? I didn't choose to be born into a family where both parents had good paying jobs, where I had both parents, where the question of having money for college was never even a thing for us. I was able to get a full tuition scholarship, but even if I hadn't, if I had wanted to go to college, it was never a question, will we be able to pay for it? It wasn't even considered. Whenever there was an issue health-wise, do we have enough money for the hospital? It was never a question. Do we have enough money for food tonight? Do we have enough money for a good meal tonight? That was never a question. We got to eat we got to eat whenever we wanted and whatever we wanted. And I saw people working in the restaurant who did not grow up that way. And so I questioned, if I hadn't grown up, would I be working in a restaurant at a low paying restaurant as a 50-year-old and be on food stamps and it seems to me the answer is quite possibly, right?
Yeah.
If I hadn't been born into the situation that I was, it seems quite possibly I would be in a very different situation than I am now. Having a college degree, no student debt, no debt at all. I own my car. I have a good paying union job. It seems quite obvious to me that my life would be very different had I not had the upbringing that I did. And so...
but for accidents of history.
Right.
And that's something that I really relate to and that resonates with me, is because I had those same feelings, and really it's just a little bit of humility to recognize that, there's a lot of luck, there's a lot of rolls of the dice, there's a lot of just factors outside of our control, and we don't get to choose whether our parents stay together. We don't get to choose whether our parents stay alive. We don't get to choose whether we had parents there from the beginning, or where we were born, what side of the tracks we were born on. So, I think that is something that should be more common, frankly.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot in our society that tries to drill that thought out of us.
Yeah, I agree with that. And
To beat up ourselves when we're failing, and to think of ourselves as, triumphant when, as individuals, we're successful. I think there's a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's and so I'm seeing these disparities in society. I'm learning about them in a more cerebral way. And I'm also learning about how other societies, of course, there's no society that's perfect, but there's other societies that don't have some of these issues. And I'm learning about how they're how they fix them, and how we could do the same thing. And so by 2016, I was totally convinced of the decency of a social democratic platform. And also, to back up just a bit, as I'm learning more about this, I'm trying to get more civically engaged, right? And the first thing that people really think to do is to be involved in partisan political politics. And so that's what I'm reading about. I'm reading about Democrats. I'm reading about Republicans. I'm listening to stuff about Democrats and Republicans, and that's really kind of my orienting worldview for a few years. But by the primary of 2016, so that would be like March of 2016, I vote for Bernie Sanders. I'm totally convinced of the practicality of a social democratic platform, but I'm still very much a social conservative, which is an interesting thing.
But also probably not that unique.
Yes.
In a lot of ways.
Right. And I even remember being I even remember walking on campus at this time, so I've just voted for Bernie Sanders at this time, and I see somebody wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, and I genuinely get upset. And I genuinely say, I don't say anything, thank God. But I think in my head, I'm like, why would somebody wear the shirt of a terrorist organization? And this
so
is
you had picked that up from
yeah,
from just out there in the ether that
right,
that Black Lives Matter was a terrorist organization.
Yeah, and so like I said, very, very contradictory politics. If you're thinking of politics as, when you believe one thing, you believe all the accompanying things that so many people do.
But as I was saying earlier, what I think is relevant there is we know a lot of these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people in our lives, and if you're listening, there's people in your life, and hell, you might be one of these people that has, a bundle of contradictions in their belief system.
Yeah.
And, I think being able to relate to that and to talk to folks and find common ground there, because you can look back on yourself and see, okay, yeah, that was weird, right? I had these different ideas bouncing around in my head, and they didn't all go together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of us have had some success in being able to talk to other working class folks who also are along that line, right? Because we get it.
Yeah. So so and at that same time, I think it was probably about that same time that I get involved in the college Democrats. Father, forgive me for I have sinned. And I end up voting for Hillary Clinton despite all of the, all the both economic and at this point social concerns that I have with her. So I'm voting for her, and I think probably I'm voting for her at this time despite her support for gay marriage and abortion and all this stuff. And but I took a class in sociology where one of the books that we talked about was The New Jim Crow. And I think that there are some good. I think that I've seen some good left criticisms of some of the narrative structure of the new Jim Crow, in some of the reasoning that it puts forward, and I'm willing to hear those. But and during the sociology class, it did not click with me, and the way that and probably if I were to be a sociology teacher, I would not start it this way. But we read the opening paragraph or the opening chapter of the new Jim Crow, and that basically lays out her thesis about how, America was really kind of basically founded on racism, and that, what we have now under mass incarceration is basically the same. And, all of our founders were like super racist and super bad and all this stuff. And that really, really was antagonizing to me. And so I was not able to engage during that class with it. But at a later date, I did finally read the new Jim Crow. And the rest of the book was really convincing to me. Like I said, maybe there are some things that I would quibble with about the narrative structure and the explanatory value of some of these things. But there is a fact of racial discrimination in our justice system, and the way that intergenerational wealth has a history that does date back to even what conservative Jake would have agreed is bad and racist. But conservative Jake didn't really understand that, okay, let's even if we just grant that racism ended in 1965, even if we were just to say that, which is obviously not the case, but even if we did, the legacy would still be being felt, because there would still be people that were not that were structurally left out of our economy, and those people had children. And what happens when you're poor and you have children? Well, your children are going to be poor.
Right. I mean, we're all the products of our mamas and grandmamas.
Right.
And I think that's huge to be able to recognize that.
And so recognizing that is really when the dominoes start falling for me socially, and I become a more orthodox left-winger. And I'm still getting involved and I'm still getting more and more involved in the college Democrats, and I'm seeing this as maybe the way forward, the way to make the world better, and all this, and so I'm the executive director, I think, of the UAH College Democrats, and the programs director for the Alabama College Democrats, which some people in some socialist groups think that this is a very high position, the programs director for the Alabama College Democrats, and that's how I got my my lofty position in the AFL-CIO bureaucracy. But that's not the case.
Yeah, that's not reality for anyone keeping up.
Yeah, but I was very active, and I did spend a lot of time. I probably knocked on 500 or 1,000 doors, probably made about 1,000 phone calls in the midterms 2018, and I was very, very, very disheartened by the results of 2018. And while there was kind of a blue wave, quote unquote, nationally, here in Alabama, 72 seats flipped from Democrat to Republican across the state. County commissions, state house, state reps, state senators, these lower offices, 72. And, and I thought I was seeing all this energy and stuff from, the Democratic Party in Alabama, and it just did not materialize at the ballot box. And so I said, because I did not grow up political, and also because when I became politicized, I considered myself more of a Bernie supporter than a Democrat. I didn't really have any loyalty to the Democratic Party as a thing. And so I said, well, is this really the best way to spend my time? Is this actually the best way to, make society better? And I came to the opinion that it's probably not to spend all of your time in electoral partisan politics, at least for me and at least in Alabama. I'm not going to tell people what they ought to do, but it was not fulfilling for me to, go knock on the door of a stranger and tell them, please, in 6 months, vote for this person that you've never met and that I've never met, and hope that they win, and hope that if they win, they don't screw you over like every other politician in your life has. It was just not a very empowering experience for me, and I didn't see results. It's quite possible that my life would look a lot different now had the election of 2018 shown some results for Democrats in Alabama, but I'm almost in a way thankful it didn't, because I'm very happy where I am now. But yeah, so it was not very personally empowering, and I didn't see any results from it. And so I said, well, what else can I do? Because I'm very much politicized. I very much have an interest in trying to make folks' lives better. And so how can I do that? And I start trying to read some more. And I reading in the chat, didn't Doug Jones win in 2017? That was 2018, actually. Or didn't he win in 2018? Doug Jones won in 2017.
Yeah.
Not 2018. It was a special election. But so I start trying to figure out what I can do, and I start reading about the labor movement, and I start reading about unions, what they've done historically, and then also what they're still doing. Unions are still actually helping people. Unions are still raising people's wages. Unions are still, saving people's jobs. And doing lots of good things. And wouldn't you look at that? You don't have to convince a stranger to trust another stranger to both of you. All you have to do to win a union is talk to people that you know about their lives and convince them that with the other people you know, you can do something to change it, and you don't have to wait for the election in November. You don't have to trust some third party. You just have to trust yourself, and you can do something about your life today. You can start working to make your life better today. You can start working to make your coworkers' lives better today. And then, as you're doing that, you can really become part of a broader movement. You can become part of something bigger than yourself, and then you can also have all these allies that will hopefully come to your aid whenever you need them, and you can come to other people's aid. That you can fight for people that you don't know, but you can do it in a way that's actually meaningful instead of this, the electoral partisan stuff. And so that was really, really fascinating to me. And so at that point in January of, maybe it was January of 2018. Maybe it was almost immediately after the election. It was either January of 18 or 19. I joined the IWW. I get an internship where I work now. I join the union. And then really the rest is kind of history about, the rest of everything that I've done is kind of cataloged, right? Because I started the show pretty, within a couple of years after that. And, there's still definitely some progression from when I joined the union to now, some evolution in my thinking, but really I think fundamentally, my convictions are much the same now as they were 4 or 5 years ago.
So you've been in the movement now for several years, and I want to come back to the show. But before we get to the show, just tell us about some of the experiences that you've had in unions and what you've been up to as a union member and as a union leader.
So I mentioned that I joined the IWW, and one of the reasons that I did that is because I really wanted to be a part of an organization, because I'm part of the American Federation of Government Employees. That's a union that represents me at my job. But I also wanted to be a part of an organization that would organize anybody.
Right.
And, the thing that really, like I said, the thing that really one of the things that catalyzed my politicization was restaurant work. And I can't go into, a local bar and say, hey, do you want to organize with the American Federation of Government Employees, right? My union won't organize them. And so I wanted to be part of the IWW because I saw what they were doing at Burgerville in the Pacific Northwest. I thought that was really cool. And through that, I was able to meet a lot of really cool people that are doing a lot of really cool things. We chartered the Huntsville IWW that you and I are still members of, and that is still going. And I think that, and even though I'm not as active in it now as I used to be, I'm more active in my own union and I'm more active in the Labor Council and the show. But I think even since I've kind of stepped back from a prominent role in the IWW, they've grown, and I'm really excited to see that. And I've been in talks recently, or I've had some conversations with them, and I understand that there are a couple of underground campaigns in Huntsville now that are really exciting, and so I am really proud to have been able to be one of the founding members of the Huntsville IWW, and really proud that is still an organization that is around, that's willing to organize any worker in North Alabama, or really in Alabama at all. They're the only IWW branch in Alabama. So that has been a great experience. I've been able to lead some organizer trainings. I've been able to go to organizer trainings led by other people with more experience than I have. I have, I've also seen some of the ways that unions can be kind of ineffective when they're not run in accordance with really small d democratic principles, and this is certainly, and that's not even to say that the people that are running these unions that aren't run that way even have this ideological opposition to it to small d democracy or militancy or anything like that. That's just they've never seen it done that way, and so they don't do it that way, right? But, my union is very much not active at work. We represent 29 agencies on the arsenal, and there's just not a lot of activity in it, not a lot of action, and so, that's something that I would very much like to see change. I would like to see a lot more activity and see us be more of a force to be reckoned with on the arsenal, whenever there's new stuff happening, whenever there's we should really be, because we represent 11,000 employees, federal employees on the arsenal. We should really be a big force when these workforce decisions are being made, and a lot of times we're not. But a year or so ago, I was appointed to be our equivalent of a shop steward, and I've been able to lead new employee orientations. I've been able to I've had a grievance case that seems to have been resolved well. The official resolution is still coming, but I think that I was able to I think that this woman's job is ultimately going to be saved, and that's a really cool thing to actually be able to say that, through our work we have made somebody's life materially and measurably and observably better.
Right.
And so that's a really cool thing. But even more than my own personal experience, because it is, even though it's been 4 or 5 years, it's still to a certain degree limited through the radio program and through my work in the Labor Council. I've been able to talk to people and hear stories about unions making people's lives better, saving people's jobs, getting people a raise, and having and talking to them on the program, talking to them off the air, and that's been a really powerful experience for me.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, the North Alabama Labor Council, tell us about your role there and kind of what you've been up to there.
Yeah, I am a founding member of the Labor Council as well. The Labor councils are regional bodies of the AFL-CIO. And the AFL-CIO is the largest federation of unions in the country, and so they have, the national body, they have state bodies, and they have regional bodies. And for about 10 or 20 years, the regional body in North Alabama was more or less defunct, and it was officially dechartered in 2017. And there had been a move among some people to try to recharter it ever since then, or even before that, to try to activate it again. And something just wasn't clicking, and they weren't able to get the ball rolling. And so that's how one of the ways that I got, after I got connected with David, he and I, as members of two different unions, worked to charter the Labor Council so that unions in the area could have this body to work together in. And so I was elected in the first election as Secretary-Treasurer. I was reelected in the second election, and the third elections are coming up now in December of this year. So I'm not sure if I'll run for Secretary-Treasurer again, but since forming, we have brought into the council 8 unions representing, several thousand members and even more represented employees in North Alabama, and that's a good thing, and I think that it's important for you. There's definitely a lot more things I like my own union. I want to see it be bigger and better, right? But I think just having that institution there for people to work within is important and good. So
Absolutely. No, I think that's a remarkable accomplishment, and I appreciate you and David doing that. I think it's something that's gonna leave a lasting impact, and definitely look forward to seeing that growth. I wanted to kind of end things by talking about the Valley Labor Report. What is the origin of this show? You've kind of alluded to it. You've told us about your background and getting politicized, getting involved in labor unions. So what led to this program?
Yeah, so I guess what led to this, one of the things that we need to say as far as what led to the program is, how did I meet David? And this is a story that I think we told on Working People when we went on there to kind of premiere the show. But I can tell it again because it's a funny story. So I meet David, I think, in 2018, before the midterm elections. I'm a young Bernie-crat at this time. I'm active in the College Democrats, and I have enough awareness that unions are kind of at least ought to be a constituency group of the working class party, which I understood to be the Democrats. And so, and when I say constituency group, I mean that in that Democrats ought to appeal. I meant that in that Democrats ought to appeal to unions, and then because of that, and also because Republicans want the destruction of organized labor, unions ought to support Democrats. And so that was kind of my understanding at the time. And now my understanding is much less it's much less reflective of that. My understanding now is that Democrats ought to really appeal to unions, and then really be grateful if we do anything for them in return. That's basically, that's basically how I think about that now. But at the time, I was, I understood that there ought to be some amount of expected reciprocity. And so I see the endorsement list of the Alabama AFL-CIO come out, and I see it endorsing a lot of Republicans. And I'm like, that's pretty weird. Why are unions endorsing Republicans when Republicans want to destroy them? And I saw one name in particular that I recognized because he is a family friend, Richie Horton. And
I know Richie.
Yeah, he is a family friend, maybe too strong, family acquaintance. Some people in my family know him. That may be more accurate. And so I messaged him on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, do you support right to work? That was basically the extent of like union issues that I knew. I was like, okay, unions are about right to work, and they don't like it. They don't like right to work. And he says, yes, I fully support right to work. And so I'm like, why are they endorsing this guy? Why? This is bizarre. Why is this the case? And so I messaged, I think it was the Alabama AFL-CIO page, and I'm like, I send him screenshots of this, and I'm like, why are you endorsing these people? And David messages me back, and he's like, difficult to explain over over text message, but I'm happy to call you. I'm happy to talk on the phone. So we talked on the phone for like an hour, and he explained to me that basically he was like, it's not necessarily a decision that I would make, but I'm going to explain their logic to you. Their logic is that there's no Democrat in this race, and so where there's no Democrat, they're going to endorse a Republican just to basically not anger them.
Right.
Just
get a little goodwill.
Yes.
Theoretically.
Just basically so that we can get our foot in the door when we want something from them. And basically he explained that the thinking is basically, why not? Who cares? Doesn't matter. The Republican's going to win. There's not even a Democrat in the race. Just endorse them, and maybe that'll give us a little goodwill. He did explain, I believe, that that's not the decision he would necessarily make, but but I'm the webmaster of the page, and so that's the reasoning. And so I said, okay, I guess that's fine. And so we connected on Facebook, and we got closer, and we talked some more. And I think I even had him come and talk to the UAH College Democrats to do like a presentation on unions. I got him and his local president to come and talk, and the state council president, actually, of the Machinists, talk to us about unions. And so I get in my head that I want to do like a liberal talk radio show, and I ask him if his union would be interested in sponsoring it, and he's like, probably not. No, I don't think so. And so, and this is in 2018 before the midterms, and I'm like, okay, that's fair enough. And I think it was probably me after I got involved in unions, and I also reached out to him to help found the IWW. But then I connect with him again about, well, how about we do a union radio show? And he's like, now that's a lot more interesting to me. And so we get started on it. We launch in May of 2020, which is a kind of a fascinating time to be launching anything. Really, that's
right.
2 months after the pandemic really kind of starts. But we wanted to do that because we're unionists. Obviously, we believe in the power of unions to really change the world, and we also believe, and so we want to lift up the struggles that working people are having across the country, and particularly in the South, how unions are winning for people. But also we wanted to do some super basic popular level education. What is a union? How do they function? How do you form a union? How do you negotiate contracts? What is a grievance procedure? What are your wine garden rights? All of these types of things that are just so, foreign to people because so few people are in unions now. They just don't have this even popular level understanding of what a union is and what it does and what its function is. And so that's why we wanted to start the show. And then also some amount of like political education about like what what policies are good for unions and workers, and why should you support these policies or why shouldn't you? And so that was kind of the thinking behind the show. Started it now. We publicly announced it 3 years ago in March, and then we were live on the radio in May. So yeah, we've been, going strong for 3 years. We took a short hiatus while I went to support recovery in New Orleans after Hurricane Ida. But that's basically the genesis for the show, and I think that's what we've been trying to do, even as we've grown a little bit and expanded and in more ways than one. That's been the driving mission of the show, and I'm really proud of what we've been able to build, David and I, and what we've been able to build since we've been bringing on more people. I think that it's pretty obvious the higher quality that we have now than if you go back and listen to, which I don't even necessarily recommend, but go back and listen to some of our first recordings, and the audio is a lot better. The video is obviously better. Our presentation is better. I feel more comfortable in front of a microphone, and so yeah, I'm really proud of the project and proud of what we're planning to do with this expansion here in March. So
yeah, I think it's been a very cool thing to see. I was a fan of the project before I got involved with it. You and I had met years prior, back when you were doing the Democratic Party thing. I met you then, and we kept running into each other at these different.
Now you were
events.
now you can't throw me under the bus.
I can't throw you under the bus. I also ran for
Party
SDEC that year.
You and I were both on the ballot as Democrats in 2018.
That's true. We were doing some coordinated campaigning and endorsed each other and that kind of thing. As fellow Bernie folks trying to get a foot in the door of the state party. By that time I had already been, involved in labor and education stuff. So it was just more of a, also, let's do this also. And I'm really glad that you found the labor movement as a home and as a place to expend your energies and your talents. I really appreciate what you've done with this show. And I think, a lot of folks do as well. And I think we've made a difference. I wanted to kind of close with, so why do you do all this stuff? Why put your time, your money, your energy, your reputation into growing the Valley Labor Report, but, really the local labor movement more broadly?
Yeah, the big why is, because I think that the world can be better, and I think that it ought to be better. I think that workers deserve more, and I think that unions are really the best way to make that happen. I gave a talk at a Juneteenth thing, and I was asked to talk about like civic organizations or something like that. And so I obviously talked about unions. And I had 3 points, and I think that the things were that, one, unions are going to be the best way to make your life better immediately. And I mean unions in like the small U, union is in 2 or more workers in their workplace organizing to make their workplace and their lives and their communities better. That's going to be the best way that you can immediately start making a difference. And it's also going to be the best way to create a political force that can be reckoned with. And, I think that we can see that in the West Virginia teacher strikes. They were able to get a Republican trifecta to give them better health care and a raise in smaller class sizes, right? And there's certainly, since that strike in 2018, there's been some backsliding, but they showed the power of what unions can do. And so we can become a powerful political organizing group to fight for things for working people, even outside of our contracts. And whether that be supporting candidates in elections and getting them across the finish line, or making elected politicians so scared of us that whatever party they're in, they just do what we tell them to, right? That's the thing that, I think that's really, I'm totally convinced that bang for your buck, unionism and union activism is really the best way to change the world. And then also, just in your community, if you're interested in just like mutual aid type work, well, unions can do some of that too. So yeah, that's basically the big why for me. Why do I spend time doing this, trying to educate people, trying to lift people's stories up, trying to organize folks? It's because I think that the world can be better, it ought to be better, and that unionism is really the best way to do that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that, you're genuinely a good dude. And I really do want to say that and put that out there. You are someone who really does have a heart for the people. You are a true believer, and and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I know sometimes, folks say that and they sort of side eye when they mention that, but I mean that in the best way. That you have a real devotion and commitment to the cause and to working people, and I think that's it's very admirable, and really appreciate all that you've done. And was there anything else you wanted to leave our listeners with this morning as we wrap up this biographical sketch here?
I don't think so. If you have any questions about our biographies, feel free to ask them, and we can answer them in an addendum in the next just the main show or something.
Sure.
But yeah, the phone number is 844-899-TVLR. You can send us a text or leave us a voicemail.
Yeah, and as we wrap up, I do want to remind folks we have our listener survey that's out. It should be in the YouTube description as well as the YouTube chat. Of course, we have our February fundraiser that's still going on. But more than anything, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is listening live. Thank you to everyone who will be listening later on. Everyone who likes and shares the video, the audio. It truly means a lot. We do it for y'all. We do it because we believe in the power of this organized working class to bring a better Alabama and a better world that's possible and necessary. And, that's why we do it, and we really appreciate it. So I don't have anything else, Jacob. I don't know if you do, but
No.
I think we're going to call it a day. Hope y'all have a great weekend. All power to the workers.
Bye, y'all.